What is up, everybody? Welcome on inside yet another edition of the Business of Social podcast powered by STN Digital. I'm your host, David Brickley. Each and every episode, we break it down for you, the ever-changing digital marketing social landscape. This show is no different. Episode number 87, as always, joined by, I'm going to start calling you guys the Katie twins, KDO, KDG, KG producers. So we got a good episode. I'm excited for this one. Definitely a slightly different industry. We like to jump around here on the Business of Social, but as we always do, we start with episode 87. We're going athletes again. What do we got?
Okay, I think we have Travis Kelce.
Mm-hmm.
I think Gronk, Jordy Nelson, maybe
Gronk
a
was
couple
87.
others.
All right. I will go with Gronk. I just like his, just his party attitude and him and Tom Brady do that, like Brady and Gronk, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where they're on the lawn chairs and he just giggles the whole time. Good dude. All right, so this is the Rob.
The kiddie swimming pool, always.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the. By the way, it's so good to see Tom Brady actually have a personality now and not be so Bill Belichick-y. I mean, the guy's living his best life down there in Tampa. All right, so episode 87, we're going to talk to Justin Schneider. He's the CEO and founder of Wolf & Shepherd. You may have seen this come across your timeline. There's been athletes that are rocking it, including Rob Gronkowski. How interesting is it that this is 87? The great Steve Nash, of course. I believe Deion Sanders rocks them, but they have really, really cool footwear, crossover footwear, really, when it comes to their boots and shoes and golf shoes and all those different things. So highly recommend you all check it out, especially if you're trying to look fly out there as a business casual. But I'm excited to talk to him about the footwear industry. We talked to Oakley, right, in the apparel sector just a couple episodes ago, and they talked about this idea that the consumer has changed, especially since COVID. They want more of that crossover attire, crossover footwear. Anyway, so excited to dive in with Justin, especially talking right to the top, the CEO. We're going straight to the top, Wolf & Shepherd, on the Business Social Podcast, episode 87. Here we go. All right, I'm so pleased and honored to be joined by Justin Schneider. He's the CEO and founder of Wolf & Shepherd. Justin, thanks so much for the time, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
All right, so we always like to start at the top with a somewhat random question to kind of, get you ready here. So if you hosted a late night TV show, who's your first guest that you have on your show?
Elon Musk.
Ooh, that's a good one, especially right now. Are you buying Twitter? You're not buying Twitter? What's the deal?
I'm not buying Twitter. I'm holding off to see what really happens here.
Exactly. But I'd love to get his thoughts on what's going on in that brain of his. So I'm with you. All right, man. So I would love to start with just all that you oversee with Wolf & Shepherd. Kind of give the elevator pitch for the listeners, what you guys do, what you provide, and kind of dive in that way.
Sure. So Wolf & Shepherd is an emerging lifestyle brand that I think has fortunately come into a position where we really get to kind of speak to customers in helping them bridge this space between, working from home, going to the office, and, this whole kind of new lifestyle around, you need something that's going to equip you to win in a world that requires versatility, comfort, and kind of a professional look. And so I think we're a brand that's, I think, equipping people to win in their life, whether that's, at home with their kids, in their hobbies, and starting with our footwear, starting with shoes, we think that we're offering them something that will help them kind of win in their life.
I love it. So you started the company back in 2016, and walk me through, I guess, the iteration of what that company was at the time, like what you wanted to create. And then you and I have talked about, right, where, COVID changed the trajectory of your business completely and kind of sent you onto a new path. So I'd love to hear from you what the original concept was, and then maybe how COVID changed that concept.
Well, sure. So, I grew up playing sports, ended up running track at Notre Dame, and knew that I loved the effort and the lifestyle of being an athlete, of kind of training to be better every day, to win every day. And the best way to stay involved with that was to design athletic shoes for Adidas and then New Balance and Reebok. And so that kind of created the foundation of knowledge needed to start Wolf & Shepherd. And the interesting thing is when you're designing let's say a track spike for a runner, you're thinking, how do I make this shoe lighter and faster and better so I can ultimately inspire the athlete to win their race?
Yeah.
Who's doing that for the other 99.9% of us who aren't professional athletes? And so coming into Wolf & Shepherd in 2016, the idea was let's equip everybody else to win on their field of performance. What kind of changed that into what it is today was in 2019, the New York Times wrote an article about Goldman Sachs going business casual Monday through Friday. And it kind of triggered for us, well, what are we equipping that guy or girl to wear so they can win at work? And ultimately went across their lives. And we ended up collaborating with Steve Nash on the crossover.
Yep.
I kind of trademarked the crossover as kind of like, hey, crossing between work and play. What's something that allows you to kind of win and feel equipped and ready to go? And so we wanted to take that kind of ethos of how you design products for athletes to the rest of the professional world. And now in COVID, it's kind of said, look, it's not just about winning at work, but it's about how do I win in my personal life as well? And people are looking for that balance. And so I think we as a brand are starting to jump into this story that feels very authentic to us about kind of winning at home and at work.
I've talked to a lot of business owners, a lot of brands that COVID either changed them for the good or the better, or maybe even like really hurt them during that time. But it sounds like for you guys, you kind of were able to find, I guess, your ethos or your mission of what you want to do going forward. Talk me through, I guess, that time period. I know it was scary for all of us business owners, but did you start to see like, wow, this is actually going to be good for business potentially based on how the society is changing?
Well, yeah, I think, initially, we had already started the development of our crossover line, which is really kind of taking some of the materials of a luxury brand and a dress shoe and blending that with an athletic sneaker, and doing that in a more overt way. We had already started to execute on that and seen early signs of success. But when COVID hit, we were still predominantly selling a formal dress shoe. And, where, our e-commerce sales would be around $50,000 to $60,000 a day with a formal shoe, it dropped below $5,000 a day.
Wow.
And so we went from, about operating as about a break-even business, and growing relatively quickly to being in a position where we would be burning $250,000 a week.
Wow.
And so we quickly had to pivot and kind of keep our pulse low. So initially it was definitely a shock, and we weren't in a position. Actually, we had just received 47,000 pairs of formal dress shoes at the end of March, a week after COVID hit. And we're thinking, great, the last thing we need is nearly 50,000 pairs of shoes.
And it's not just office work, but nobody's going to weddings, nobody's going to formal events. Like everything was done.
Yeah. So we had all of our cash tied up in a shoe that nobody needed to wear for a few years.
Wow.
And we had prepayments down on our crossover that we had collaborated with Steve Nash on, but those weren't going to arrive until September. And so we really were in a position of hibernation for almost 6 months, almost 2 quarters, going into the fall when we started to get our crossovers back.
Because you were waiting on the prototype and like the actual production of the crossovers?
Right. We had done like an initial launch in the holiday of 2019, but we were out of stock. We were waiting for that next order to come in for the fall.
And the supply chain issues, all that upsurge factored in. It's crazy.
Totally. So where we were probably didn't have a perfect form of product market fit pre-pandemic, we started to fall into that kind of ideal product market fit and something that I think that is sustainable for the future. Yeah. But again, once we did that, we had run into operational issues with tied up cash in the wrong products and, and not having the, capacity to get stuff due to supply chain constraints.
Very interesting. Yeah. Thanks for breaking all that down. So I'm excited to talk about this idea of crossover because I had Oakley on the podcast a couple shows ago, and they talked about just the consumers really demanding this crossover. What they're seeing in apparel is I want to have the same short that I wear on the golf course that I can wear by the pool, or I can wear, maybe go back to work with it type thing. So I'm sure you geek out a lot about the psychology of the consumer, what's happened post-COVID as well. What have you noticed about the market in terms of that, like demand, I guess, from consumer, where I need to have someone that I can do multiple things with?
Well, I think right after COVID, people were looking for kind of the equivalent of a comfort meal in terms of the products they would buy. What makes me feel safe? What makes me feel comfortable in a world that's so volatile? Right. And so a lot of brands spoke to that immediately. They shifted their messaging to say, hey, we can help you feel comfortable. We can equip you with something that's going to make you feel safe. But as we've kind of emerged from that COVID crisis and, we're kind of going into almost like post-COVID now leading up into a recession, you've got people who are saying, I want some stability in knowing that that your message is true and authentic as well. And so now it's evolved into, are you someone who really, emulates what you say you create and the type of brand you are? And people are looking to,
Yeah.
I think their teeth into brands with substance and ones that kind of talk about allowing you to be more than just one thing.
Yeah, I think what I've noticed too, just doing like different analysis of this is, millennials definitely, but Gen Z, like if you're not speaking their language and you're not with their mission, they're not going to buy from you. Like that's a huge thing. I think all Fortune 500 brands and all brands should be looking at right now. Like you better be aligned and understand what your mission is for folks to have that long-term, success.
Totally. And I think that's something I think we've been very thoughtful about is, a lot of brands feel, especially younger brands, they have the power and the ability to shift their messaging. But if that message isn't something that they authentically believe or they live out in their company culture, then the consumer susses that out. They sniff it out, and ultimately you see it in kind of the retention of those customers. For us, it's not though. It's like we believe that sustainability is important. We think kind of ESG mission, the mission behind ESG company is important. But at the end of the day, those are all things that just need to be features of what we do, features of the brand, not necessarily for us. It's about building a winning lifestyle. And part of building a winning lifestyle is being innovative, sustainable, having healthy practices, having a strong company culture. But ultimately, like we're trying to lead with what we know best. And it's like, how do we equip you to perform in your life? And so we want to take an innovative approach to doing that and have products that happen to be sustainable, or we happen to have some things that we do that are giving back to the community.
Well, I've been asking a lot of folks this question because it's such a hard balance wire to act on. But over the last couple of years, there's been so many moments, right? With COVID and Black Lives Matter, anti-Asian hate, school shootings, like so many things that are happening in our world in an unfortunate way. I guess as a CEO with a brand like yours, how do you decide when the brand is going to speak up for a certain moment? How do you decide when you're going to speak up to maybe your internal staff about these different, world events? Because I think a lot of brands are struggling with like, what makes sense for my brand to say something? Can we even add to the conversation? Can we help here? What has kind of been your, approach to that?
Well, I think that one is you have to have conviction around your like values as a company, and you need to have kind of already externalize some of that before these things happen. And so, for example, with, some of the things that have happened in the past, like for me, I'm half Korean, half German, or I'm quarter German, quarter Irish, and half Korean. So I grew up in an Asian household. And I mean, it's interesting because I don't necessarily look Korean, but that's predominantly what I am. And so that's something where I have a lot more context. And I think naturally, I feel like I have a foundation to be more vocal because I've actually thought about it prior to those issues arising. With other issues that maybe I'm not as well versed on, if we don't have someone internally in leadership who can speak to that, then instead of coming out and making a statement without really being thoughtful and making sure that that statement's authentic and we can stand behind it, we need to, what it does is it accelerates internally our thought process and making sure that we understand and have kind of underwritten ourselves how we can either, impact for the better, whatever situation's in front of the company. Fortunately, we're starting to come to a scale where I think our customer expects us to have a voice on most of these, most topics culturally. And as we've done that now, we kind of preemptively are making sure we're prepared and we understand kind of what's our stance. Can we back that up? Is there substance? And if not, then, really we shouldn't amplify the issue by stating something that we can't stand behind.
Yeah, I love that. So walk me through from like a retail versus e-com. I know obviously started e-com, but what's kind of the split there for you guys on a day-to-day?
More than 95% of our business is wolfandshepard.com. We did start wholesale with Nordstrom and Brooks Brothers. We're doing some collaborations that we have coming up that we're excited to launch this fall. But we're very much kind of e-com or direct to consumer first, omni-channel second.
Yep.
And that'll continue to be our strategy for the next 2 to 3 years.
I would love to hear from you as much as you can share anyway, just like what is working. I mean, if you're 95% e-com, obviously your digital, your marketing, your social, your email strategy, your paid media strategy is so imperative for the overall business success. But I'm curious and maybe this has changed, and I'm sure it has changed post-COVID as well. But what strategies do you see really moving the needle for you all for that brand awareness or for, at the end of the day, that call to action?
Well, here's the thing. We talk about like kind of the known unknowns, like what do we know works and what do we know are working channels that we haven't found out yet. And so we want to make sure that we have spend allocated, some of our marketing dollars allocated to uncovering these new channels. The thing that's worked really well for us is we've had a great advisor in Brandon Windle, who was a former co-founder and CMO at Tecovas, who really helped us build out our internal system on kind of thinking, how do we build a channel agnostic approach to marketing? Meaning, let's not treat search, display, digital, or even retail, catalog, out of home, radio, whatever it may be, treat them all as, which one provides the most predictable low-hanging fruit. And so as long as we can reallocate dollars across a variety of channels based on where on any given day we're getting the best contribution margin, or looking at kind of leading indicators like cost per click, wherever the best dollar is spent, we want to reallocate to those channels with the fixed budget we've set at the beginning of the month. And so that's helped us, for example, last year when, all of the iOS updates was creating, was creating a lot of issues for companies that were dependent on social. And so Facebook, Instagram really took a beating for us. We were under 10% of spend in Facebook and Instagram. Right now, I think we have about 9% of spend there.
Really? That's super surprising. Super surprising.
Yes. And that's helped us a lot because we don't have that dependency. In fact,
over leveraged. Yeah. I mean,
look at over leveraged. We have a huge portion that goes into like TV and radio, which have higher barriers of entry. But oftentimes, if you can find the right content, fit, and story, can be an incredibly efficient way to reach new customers.
This may get super granular, but in terms of linear and radio, trying to get that person to watch your ad and then take action on their phone, on their laptop, anything like you guys have kind of tested there that seems to be working? I know you see a lot of these checkout codes, you see a lot of Act Now 24, like anything you guys are kind of using from a call to action standpoint to incentivize folks to act on that?
So we have done gift with purchase. We do a free pair of socks if you subscribe to SMS and email. Okay. So for us, it's still really important to have a good capture rate on the amount of emails and SMS subscriptions that we're getting. Right. That helps really offset kind of your ROAS later on, if you can kind of work through those two channels, owned channels, media channels. So I think that's definitely something we've done, but what we've found is like we used to do a lot more promotions. For example, Black Friday, Cyber Monday would would kind of average out our discount rate to about 5 to 6% of revenue. Yeah. And we found that was similar to having kind of, injecting the arm with social, Facebook and Instagram. It's like you just keep needing, and then what you do is you start to deplete the brand equity the customer. So it took us about three to 4 months to kind of wane off of any kind of promoting during the holidays. And what we found is that, longer term, you start to see a trailing effect where our repeat rates are stronger, the LTV of customers are much stronger. And so if we can kind of get to pure full price, then really we're trying to find efficient ways to generate engagement, but we don't want to batter down our brand equity in exchange for conversion, because all that's doing is kind of covering up an issue that's going to bubble up later in a bigger way.
I'm sure you've heard of it. One of my favorite stories is how Louis Vuitton literally burns bags if they have an overage because they don't want too much in the market and find themselves at Ross, so it makes sense. It's funny you mentioned that because I've noticed just as a consumer over the last 12 months or so, such a high uptick in all these websites I go to, especially if I'm in Target on Instagram, that has the 10 to 15% off if you subscribe to newsletter and SMS. I'm curious, it's like if you want to put your consultant hat on for me, with any e-com brand out there, how imperative is that SMS text, that email to just the lifetime value of the customer?
Well, I think that they make up for it. And I think it hurts their lifetime value. And I think the thing right now that depending on if you have venture capital or private equity on your cap table, a lot of people are driving, what's your LTV to CAC? Right. What's the lifetime value? Talk to me about your customer cohort. How long do you retain these customers and how much incremental dollars do you get out of a consumer? And it's very transactional in nature, and they're constantly looking for near-term indicators that are going to help sell that story long-term. And the realities do not match the narrative. So I think here's the thing that
nor does a quarterly earnings report. You can't run a business on a 3-month. I always go back to that. Yeah.
I mean, there were some people bashing a direct-to-consumer brand for losing money in Q1 and looking at that in isolation. But if you look at the full year, they're actually a relatively profitable company.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's a lot of narratives swinging around, and it's very easy for founders and executive teams for younger companies to try to just follow the trend on what's working. And the reality is that everybody has to climb their own mountain. And I think as a brand, especially if you're trying to build a lifestyle brand, every consumer company needs to climb their own mountain and define who is their customer, how big is that marketplace, and where do we fit on that trail or that journey to capture that audience. And the reality is that you learn about this in Economics 101 is like the invisible hand. And the invisible hand will move your product, your business, where it ultimately needs to be in the market. So if I just keep pushing really hard on certain marketing channels to acquire more customers, but I'm getting incrementally less revenue, then what I'm doing is I'm trying to force where the marketplace is to where I want it to be. And there's inefficiency naturally in that. So I think you have to the reality is for us is we're going to create our parameters, climb our own mountain, and ultimately the market will bear how big we should be.
Right.
Unfortunately, most people don't want to accept that and then change ultimately what they are to accommodate a bigger market if that's the primary.
Especially to like a brand is so much about a feeling. How do I feel when I put this on? What do others feel when they see me wearing this Nike swoosh on my shoes? And that's a difficult thing to do. It's brand awareness. It takes, years and years and years to build that. You have to get trust from, let's talk about it, right? Like guys like Steve Nash, Rob Gronkowski. I wanted to ask you about that. Tapping into those athletes that kind of speak to your core market of like, those guys that want to have that crossover effect. How successful has that been for you to be able to tap in? I know I also saw that Dion has rocked your stuff too, but just curious, like when it comes to your marketing or how you can add to your distribution outlets or your ecosystem, how those campaigns have worked for you.
They've been, they've changed the trajectory of the company.
Wow.
It's funny, we have an investor who has worked with brands like Brady Brand and Skims. And I said, why is this successful? And he's like, I mean, isn't it obvious? It's Kim Kardashian or it's Tom Brady. Right. And I was like, that's it. That's all it took. And it's like, yeah, that's all it took. And there's some truth to that. However, the brand ethos or message has to align with that influencer.
Yeah.
And I think what's happened is we've kind of, like you said, Dion or Magic Johnson or Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, we have all these people who naturally wear a product. And so we'll reach out or their stylists will reach out and we'll start to cultivate a relationship.
That's awesome.
And those are things that naturally kind of progress. We've actually got 3 other really great big name ambassadors that over the next 12 to 15 months, you'll see kind of join our squad.
Nice.
And how this
send The Rock whatever he wants, because that'll do well for you.
Right. The Rock's quite expensive though. I mean, if you work with him, even if he likes your product, you're looking at an 8-figure payday.
Oh,
so
yeah. About 1.5 million per post, I think, on average, something like that. So
something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thing is that you bake that in as part of your contribution margin, right?
Yeah.
So what we found is it just generally nets out, and it depends on channels. So like for us, working, it just happens to be that our story, which we feel is authentic to us, aligns with Rob Gronkowski to people who love sports.
Yeah.
And that he's the guy
it's authentic. That's important.
It's very authentic. Yeah. And I think that it's very content specific, right? Like, we invested in creating stories for TV advertising and connected TV that really were kind of just like, it was just like burning money in a bucket initially. But when you get the right content with the right channels, then you can go from what was $12, $13, cost per click, all the way down to 60 to 80 cents cost per click. And there's that big of a delta.
Wow.
And the thing is that look, most people are seeing cost per clicks around $15 to $17 now on Facebook. I mean, it's not that hard to beat that. The thing is that it's risky because people don't know how to underwrite. Am I outperforming my social advertising results? Because it's very predictable, right? But when you go to TV or catalog, you have to have a lot more intuition and have ways of measuring that performance. And those out-of-home channels are very, very content heavy, very content specific.
Yeah. Again, to put your consultant hat on for me for other brands, like what do you think is where's the undervalued attention, or where's the space or the campaigns or the omni-channel part of marketing that you don't think enough brands focus on that ends up bearing a great fruit?
Well, I'll speak to kind of the direct to consumer
Yeah.
era, or this digitally native brand group. So like my cohort of companies that have been founded in the last decade have initially launched out of an opportunity to cut out the middleman and sell products directly to customers. They emphasized on the business. There was a lot of emphasis on the business model, and you have a lot of founders who come from investment banking, private equity,
Right.
really understand how to build a business and actually have built relatively successful companies. The ones that unfortunately have floundered in some ways are the ones that were really brand driven. So you have companies that focused on storytelling that, had they gotten to the point where they're in the mid 8 figures, you can start to see that those are the companies that are really going to become global brands.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ones that have had to pivot it with, it's funny because a lot of venture capital and private equity had said, hey, keep your SKU count small. Be like, just have one style that everybody buys and build a multi-$100 million business on that. And that does work to get to 100 million. But in order to start telling a story, you need to share a lifestyle that people can buy into. And it needs to be not just aspirational, but something we talk about is inspirational. How are you inspiring the athlete and others, or in our case, the athlete and others, to live out their life? And it can't be, Ralph Lauren was built on an aspirational message of the hand. Ours is built on an inspirational message of like, define the win for you and let us help you get there in reality. And so I think it's messaging. Storytelling is the biggest thing that most brands compromise in their pursuit of growing to some level of scale.
100%. And I think not focusing on upper funnel marketing, going straight to lower funnel and just beating people over the head with like, I don't even know who you are. Why are you selling to me? Right.
But that's the thing, is there's pressure. Like for us, we're very fortunate. We don't have any large institutional backers on our cap table. So we're owned by individuals. And it's allowed us to have the freedom to kind of explore and kind of continue to drive brand equity and our brand storytelling. And that ultimately is what's, I think, can allow us to be a global brand.
I love that. And I think so much of it too, right, is like, we're the Uber of this or Uber of that or what have you. And like trying to use the blueprint, which I think is important, right? Like, look at companies that have been successful in the past, but they also grew up in a different era than you. And as you and I know, the algorithms and the DTC market changes, every 3 months, it seems like. So what worked in the 90s and 2000s may not work in 2022 to 2030, right? So I'm totally aligned on that. All right, so I want to do some rapid fire here at the end to get some more thoughts from you. That being said, any brands or accounts or creators that you follow that you think are doing a really good job being storytellers or building their brand across social, across digital?
Definitely. I think, Treksmith is one of those brands that has really kind of owned an identity. And although you wouldn't think it'd be a category that could grow rapidly or quickly, they've honed in on something that is very authentic to them around a story and a lifestyle of running and running culture that is not only honoring heritage and tradition, but is making that relevant for the next generation. And I think that when you can create a story that is compelling and authentic and and crosses generations, then that creates a winning formula. There's a few brands that have done that. Not everyone has been able to kind of reach success, because I think you need to kind of have that balance of business acumen, just smart business acumen, and great storytelling. Oftentimes that's why you see kind of co-founder teams. But they're definitely one that's done a great job with that.
That's awesome. I guess any books, podcasts, newsletters, blogs that you consume pretty regularly that you enjoy?
Not too different than probably most people. I do enjoy How I Built This. It's kind of like a guilty pleasure at this point. It's always fun to just hear kind of firsthand narratives of people's, founding stories. I'm a big fan of Influence by Cialdini. It just talks about kind of some of the science behind how people think and how you can influence outcomes. I think so much of, even though I come from a creative background as a industrial designer, I understand how really almost every role is a form of sales. And so I think great sales is driven by being authentic to yourself, being hungry to grow, and telling an incredible story. So lead by telling great stories and make sure that that's cohesive and consistent to who you are and what culture you're building. And then the market will bear how big you should be. But ultimately, I think that's how you achieve success.
I love that. On that note, I love asking questions, especially to CEO and founders. So many people get this mixed up, but the difference from sales and marketing, right? How do you explain the difference from marketing and sales?
Well, I think sales is kind of like the outcome and marketing is the buildup. You capture sales, you convert customers, you generate revenue, ultimately, as a result of matching up a compelling story that mimics the need or desires of the person receiving the message.
Yeah.
And I think marketing's job is to craft that message in a compelling way that efficiently reaches that customer. And ultimately, the sales is the transaction element, and whoever's driving transaction, who's driving storytelling. I think there's a blurry line there for some, but I think that they're very distinct and different.
I love that. My final question for you. I mean, should Notre Dame be in a conference? Should they stay independent? I mean, what's going on here?
I don't know. I'm having trouble following myself. Ultimately, I think that the university and the teams have, I think, great leadership. And they will make the right decisions. It just may not look like it at the time. I think maybe in hindsight, we might be pleased with the decisions that are being made today.
I love it. Actually, I lied to you. One last question for you. If you could recommend anybody to be a future guest in your network that would provide value to the great listeners here, anybody come to mind on your side?
I think Alex Verity, he and his twin brother and his wife all founded and co-founded Verity brand. Yeah. They're based out of New York, and they've done a fantastic job. So these are incredibly smart, dynamic individuals who do it all. And I think if I were to say like a corporate ambassador, I'd say like Alex, who I'm closest with, is somebody who does it all. Someone who not only is creative, but knows how to win with his family and win at work. And so that would be kind of top of mind as someone I'd recommend.
I love it. The great Nate Checkits from Rowan, of course, introduced you and I. So just like keep that train going. I appreciate it. But thanks so much, man, for all the knowledge that you dropped on the listeners and getting into the granular details of cost per click and all that. I love that stuff, man. You're speaking my love language, so I appreciate that. Justin Schneider, thanks so much, man. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, David. Thanks,
man. All right, there he was, Justin Schneider, the CEO and founder of Wolf & Shepherd. That was amazing. I mean, I love talking apparel, footwear, e-com, especially when a business is 95% of their business is e-com. But I will thank you, Justin, for being vulnerable there and sharing some great information about, hey, shoot, man, we had to shut down for 6 months. We had to kind of wait for that Steve Nash crossover sneaker to come. But, thank God, too, they had the foresight to continue to innovate, continue to think about what's next, because that was already in production when the entire society is like, okay, stop. We don't need nice shoes anymore. We don't need dress shoes. But we definitely need a crossover type sneaker. And I mean, now they've kind of been hitting it out of the park, and also just sharing the cost per click. I mean, $14 down to 60 cents. I'm sure we got to tell Liz that, Katie. She'll probably have a heart attack. But
I honestly was thinking that the whole time. As soon as she started saying like ROAS, I'm like,
oh,
Liz.
Yeah. Liz is our senior director of media over here at STN. So we're always talking to her about all the analytics and stats on that. But yeah, I mean, really cool stuff. It's really amazing too to see, The Rock and stuff kind of just naturally using the brand. Obviously, they're sending him content as well. But to see the major uptick and it makes sense, right? Like Gronkowski, I mean, the fact that Tom Brady is behind Brady helps quite a bit. He mentioned Kim Kardashian Skims. Even, I know Kylie Jenner, originally it was $1 billion with the lip kit. I think it's now been down to like 500 million, no big deal. But that's been kind of said. It's not even a great quality product, but because Kylie's behind it, I mean, the rest is history, right? So say no more, Michael Jordan, Nike, you get the picture.
Oh, absolutely. I do think that roster of influencers is pretty great. Nash, Gronk, Magic, lots of big hitters.
And I think I love what he talked about, like just the venture capital and like the 3-month windows and how they look at success. And it, if I give The Rock $1 million today, it doesn't make sense on any P&L, on any earnings report. But if you can make $9 million off that $1 million in the next 3 months based on his, the brand equity he then gives you by recommending your product, it's just about the long game. So I think, unfortunately, so many brands are tied to that 3-month earning reports, either with their investors or obviously with Wall Street. And he makes so much sense. In order to build a brand, tell a story, and build that, connection, it just takes longer than a week, a month, or even a year, right? So great stuff by Justin Schneider. So excited to to meet him and continue our relationship off the pod as well. Hope you all got some value out of it, as I know you did, as you guys were in marketing, social, and digital, and that was a lot of marketing, social, and digital for you. So listen, it's free 99. So I think you got a good value here. But as always, want to thank the Katie's, KDO, KDG for all their help on the podcast. And thank you for listening. Make sure to rate us on iTunes. That's it. This has been the Business Social Podcast. My name is David Brickley. It's all been powered by STN Digital.